Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome back to another Thirsty Thursday live stream. Happy Thursday. I hope everyone is having a good Thursday. I said Thursday about 3 times. But today we have someone and some people that are super special, super close to me, and I really appreciate them being on tonight. But before I bring them in, we're going to be talking about some fun stuff, some cybersecurity in the medical field and medical device hacking. So if you have any questions during the stream, just throw it in the chat and we'll get to it whenever we can. And we're going to bring these folks in and they're going to introduce themselves. And yes, Christian and Trevor. What's up, guys?
How's it going?
Good. So thank you so much for joining the stream tonight or this morning, wherever you are in the world. So I really appreciate it. So I guess we can start with Trevor. So who is Trevor? And, introduce yourself and we'll go to Christian.
Yeah, so I'm the technical lead at Blue Goat Cyber. I focus on a lot of the actual hands-on hacking for medical devices. I come from a web application pen testing background primarily, but before we were just kind of doing a lot of the standard stuff, internals, externals, web apps. And now I've shifted my focus to mostly hardware hacking, medical devices, and kind of doing FDA submissions. So a lot more document side, but that's kind of the quick and dirty of what I do.
Nice. Awesome. Thank you. And Christian, if you don't know who Christian is, you probably lived under a rock. I've seen his videos way back in the day. So thank you for everything you do. And give it a little intro.
Yeah, I'm Christian. I've been in cybersecurity for over 20 years. Used to be in the Air Force and did information assurance back there. We didn't call it cybersecurity back in the day. This is my second cybersecurity business, Blue Goat Cyber. My first one I sold in 2020. I worked for the parent company for a while. And before that, I did freelance work. So I taught malware analysis, CISSP, pen testing, like all over the world, and did that for quite some time. I've also did a couple gigs where I tried to break into aircraft, commercial aircraft, while they're flying and while they're on the ground to help them get FAA approved. From a cybersecurity perspective. So I've done, some interesting things. And now with this company, we focus on medical device cybersecurity.
Nice. So I guess, Trevor, so going from the traditional web app, internal, external, etc., going into now medical device hacking, how has that transition been? And for those that are listening, if they wanted to do the same, maybe, they're like, oh, this stuff sounds super cool. How can we do it? So how has it been and what do you have to do to get into it?
I think kind of the biggest thing that translates really well is just the general skill of being a hacker, knowing where to go find information, knowing what information is relevant, and just kind of the methodical thinking that you need to look at a product, an application, a network, a device, whatever it is, and say, what are going to be my paths in? How am I going to figure this out? And that's a pretty universal skill with pen testing. It translates really well. I would say if I had to pick one thing that I learned before that translates the best, it would definitely be kind of the web app side of things. That's going to be definitely present in a lot of these medical devices. There will be web app features, or some of them are just entirely web apps. And so those skills translate pretty well, but just the mindset is kind of the most important thing to have, really.
Cool. And from my understanding and from what I've gathered from the medical device hacking, doing some RE work translates too, right? Reverse engineering, understanding the code on these on these devices, and poking at that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I would say the more common situation that we get is the medical device tests are usually going to be entirely white box, anything we want. And so we'll try to reverse engineer it. But having said that, you have to know what you're looking at. You have to read code. You have to understand what's going on. And you have to be able to, we'll get devices with million+ lines of code. If you're going to read through every line of that, it's going to take you forever. And you have to be efficient. You have to know where are we to find problems? What are those problems going to be? And be able to rip through pretty big code base pretty quickly to see what's going on.
So cool. So like for those that are listening again, like what are some like common tools that we use in a medical device hacking? You know, like we use a web app, you know, we have Burp Suite, we have, you know, Web, and you have Wapalyzer, Foxy Proxy, you know, we have all the tools, WP Scan, GoBuster, Dirtbuster, etc. What are some like common tools that we would use to hack medical devices?
This is probably my favorite part about hacking medical devices is how many different tools you can use. You know, going through, we'll pick 3 engagements that I'm doing in a month. I'll run through 60 plus tools easily. Mm-hmm. So with a more software focused style medical device, Suite, Dirtbuster, GoBuster, you know, run Nicto against it and just kind of comb through the application like you would a normal web app. Once we get to the hardware side of things, we have, you know, our rubber duckies, bash bunnies, bunch of different like adapters and emulators. So we have got a little folder of all these sorts of different bash bunny scripts and just plug it into the device, let it run away and see what it captures. We'll take a lot of fun, you know, just standard tools like grab a little, plug it into a device and see what happens. Take a keyboard, see if you can send interface you have. Anything you can plug into it, you should try to plug it into it and see if that'll get you a good way to break out of the device or to introduce a weird state to it. As for kind of the more typical hacking tools, like I said, with web apps, it's going to be the standard stuff, but you know, running through source code, there are a lot of different SaaS products available for static application testing, and that kind of helps identify those problem points with a piece of software, lets you break apart the code really fast. Like my personal tool that I enjoy using is Sneak, but there are a lot of different tools out there that can kind of fit different needs. But it really just depends on what the product is. A lot of different options out there.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you for that. And yeah, like I just put in the chat, if anyone has any questions for Trevor or Christian throughout the chat, please throw it in the comments and we'll get to it as soon as I can. So awesome. So Christian, I guess like going from like your traditional business prior, you weren't doing a medical device hacking, right? So was it like a traditional pen testing or was it more niche like this?
So we got into medical device hacking in the business, but it was my first business, so I didn't really know what I was doing. And I did too much. I did training, so we taught CISSP classes, Security Plus, CEH. You know, we taught classes. We did physical security. We did penetration testing, and we did medical devices as well. Okay. So I feel like I spread the business too thin, and it diluted our message a little bit in our target audience. So now in this business with Blue Goat, we're focused on medical device cybersecurity. We're not doing training. I mean, we can do normal pen tests as well, but the focus is purely on medical device cybersecurity. And that is also more of from a business perspective, what we call a blue ocean strategy. You know, there's not a lot of sharks in the ocean, so you're not going to all the fish aren't going to get eaten up. Whereas if you're doing penetration testing, like web app testing, that's more of a red ocean strategy because you have lots and lots of competitors. And it's kind of when you have a lot of competitors, it's a commoditization it becomes, which reduces like the price to extremely low point where anybody, you know, a kid next door in the college dorm can offer a pen test for $500, you know, where if you're a company, you can't compete with that. So medical device cybersecurity is the niche and there's not a lot of competitors because it as Trevor is alluding to, it takes a pretty steep learning curve, not just from a pen test perspective, but also from all the vernacular and the language and the FDA and the medical acronyms. There's a lot of acronyms in those two organizations as well, or that industry.
Cool. Yeah. Obviously that's a whole new, world for me as well. So thank you for that. And so I know we wanted to speak on, the importance, we'll stick with you, Christian, for a minute, like the importance of entering the world of cybersecurity, right? Because, people say you need a degree. People say you need 100 different certifications. You need to have a GitHub. You have to have a YouTube channel. You have to show, all these different things. What is your take, being in the field for over 20 years, doing hiring, firing, the whole shebang? What do you look for when you hire someone?
I look for someone that has the right attitude and the right emotional intelligence and people skills first. I don't care about the certifications. I don't care about college degrees. And that's what my first book was about, The Smartest Person in the Room. I feel like in our industry, we're lacking emotional intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
And in my first company, most of my problems were because my staff didn't have the people skills.
Mm-hmm.
They would upset a client and talk over their head. And now I flip the script. I look for the attitude and the aptitude first. That's what matters to me. And like with Trevor, when I hired Trevor, what I think a lot of people misunderstand in cybersecurity is they just want to get in cybersecurity, but that doesn't really mean anything to me. Like with Trevor, he was very specific. He had crystal clear clarity that he wanted to do ethical hacking, pen testing. That's what his passion was, and still is. Where if you just come to me and say you want to get into cybersecurity, that doesn't tell me anything.
Absolutely.
I mean, do you want to do auditing? Do you want to do GRC? Do you want to do forensics? Do you want to do pen testing? Do you want to work in a SOC? It tells me you really don't know what you're getting into, and that's a red flag.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a very, very good point, because, as being on the internet now, like everyone, I want to get into the field of cyber. I want to get into cyber. And obviously my thing was always, what aspect of cyber, right? Because there's a million different avenues. Maybe you don't like the technical aspect. Maybe you, like you said, like GRC or auditing, doing, stuff on that side. Or if you're like, oh, I don't want to do auditing at all, I want to look at logs all day. Okay, you can, and do IR, incident response, or DFIR, etc. So having a, like you said, crystal clear path of, okay, I want to be able to hack things, or I want to be able to defend things, having that clear, that mindset of, okay, what I want to do today is where I want to go forever, because it's not, you're never locked into anything. Maybe you want to be, a pen tester today, then you stumble upon, like you said, malware analysis. You're like, oh, I just want to go look at, malware samples all day. And so I think that's a really, really good point. So no certifications are needed, no degrees. And so I'll do tag team to Trevor now. So like when you got into the world of cyber, from my understanding, you want to do pen testing, you want to do hacking. What tickled your interest in this field? Like, were you like, oh man, did you do something prior and you're like, oh, like, I don't want to do XYZ anymore, I want to become a hacker? Like, what was your turning point in life that you became a hacker?
So my original big focus and kind of my original end goal was engineering. I was always pretty good at math, and I figured I could use that for something. And what better way than be an engineer? Turns out once I went to engineering school, realized it wasn't everything it was cracked out to be. But when I was younger, played a lot of video games, as many people my age did. And I got really into, seeing what ways I could break the game, having little cheats for a video game, little modifications here and there, whatever it was. And I was kind of thinking back on that, and I said, I bet I could do something with that. And I was probably 16 or 17. I started looking into pen testing and what that would entail, and looking at certifications that would be good, looking at the paths that I could take to get myself there, and just went headfirst. All I cared about, all I did was read about it 24/7, study for certifications, did capture the flags on Hack the Box and Try Hack Me, and just really got obsessive with it to the point where I was able to get the clarity on what I wanted to do. And the most important thing was I was able to realize that I wanted to do it. There are plenty of things, using engineering as an example, where I thought I would want to do it. It sounded fun. It sounded something I could do. And then, sitting in Calc 2 under a textbook that is 6 inches thick, and I realized, well, okay, maybe this isn't what I thought it was going to be. But getting some, not necessarily, doing a lot of these capture the flags, doing all of this studying, let me know that pen testing was something I could really enjoy and something I could see myself doing for a really long time.
Cool. So before we get into the certifications, I want to ask you about, you did a lot of CTFs. So do you believe doing the CTFs, because I'm going to be 100% honest, before I went for my OSCP, I never touched a CTF in my life. And I think CTFs are actually harder than a real pen test, but that's just my opinion. So what are your takes on, like, okay, do you feel, a kid, or, like you said, like Christian said, 16-year-old kid, next door can charge you $500 to hack your network, and they're probably in your network already, right? So these whatever, I don't want to say kids, these people out there that are doing CTFs and learning these CTFs, do you think that's having a boatload of CTFs under your belt? Do you think they can go into a pen test and perform a pen test? Because you did it, right? Like, how was the transition for you?
I think that there are skills that translate. Learning kind of the general process is definitely helpful. But ironically enough, I think doing the easiest CTFs you can find are much more helpful than doing difficult CTFs. Like, I've done plenty of very hard CTFs, the insane ranked, whatever on Hack the Box, that you're gritting your teeth looking for a pinhole to try to get through into a network. And never once have I actually type of thing on a real pen test. It just doesn't really happen. But doing the lower level, the easier CTFs teach you the basics. You get one of the first things you do. Open up Burp Suite, run your scanner, do directory bus, mapping out the application, looking for any input fields. And that's the basic process that's consistent. But getting super deep into it, doing, people say, oh, well, I have the guru rank on Hack the Box or whatever. I've done hundreds and hundreds of CTFs. I don't think that really translates that well. There's not a whole lot there. I think that there are some that are really high quality, not necessarily CTFs. Like Hack the Box Academy is a great training platform, but they do more concept and prove the concept. And so you'll be learning about cross-site scripting, and then they have a little mini lab where you practice it. I think that's really applicable and that's really helpful. But doing actually the advantage is a little bit limited.
Cool. And before we jump back to Christian, like now, you do have a few certifications under your belt, right? Which ones do you have, if you want to talk about that? And like doing those certifications, do you find that was more realistic to a real pen test, or what was that about?
Yeah, so currently I have the CBBH from Hack the Box, the EJPT from INE, and then the CRTP and the CARTP from Altered Security. The EJPT is very, very, very introductory, but it covers a few good concepts. Specifically for what I do, the Hack the Box, it's in depth. It's a big test. It covers a lot of areas, but it's pretty realistic. I have actually done a lot of stuff from that exam where from all that exam, and I'll say, oh, what did I learn in this module? And then I'll be able to actually execute some otherwise rather difficult tests on a real environment. For the CRTP, I think that's another really good certification. Everything Altered Security puts out is very high quality, and I appreciate that they talk about the impact of what you're doing. So if you're, jumping onto a box, throw Mimikatz on it and try to strip out credentials, in a CTF, that's fine. There's no impact, there's no harm done. In a real environment, you're going to trigger about 50 alarms and set half the IT department freaking out. So seeing what actually is going to happen is really good. And so CRTP is the on-prem AD red teaming certification, and CARTP is their Azure Cloud red teaming certification. And they explain what you're actually going to see in a real environment, which I think is really helpful. I've taken a course for the OSCP as well, and they touch up on a lot of that stuff. And it feels like they're teaching you Some stuff where they go into more depth, they teach you, obfuscating shellcode in another binary, which is pretty cool. And that's stuff that I don't see elsewhere. But they more teach you how to think about the capture the flag approach, which there is some advantage to. But like I was saying, with the CTFs, you don't see it as much in a real engagement. And so it's definitely a little more limited.
Cool. Yeah. And that's definitely good insight. And obviously, I guess I can say, like, yeah, there was some choppiness on the connection. So at least I missed a little bit, but I think I got the gist of it. And having your CRTP and alternate securities training gives you more of the meat and potatoes of what you're going to be doing in an internal red team engagement or a pen test with Active Directory. Is that correct? You're right. Can you hear us?
Hey, sorry about that. Yeah, a little bit of a weird signal right now. Sorry, what was that last question?
No, so I guess my question, I was just trying to say what you were saying. I was trying to understand what you were conveying because it was really choppy. So what you were saying was if you go through the training of the CRTP from Altered Security, that's like if you're inside of a domain environment and like you said, dumping Mimikatz on a machine, is okay in a CTF environment, but they're going to show you, okay, the impact, or God forbid this happens, what can really happen? Like you said, set up a whole bunch of SIM alerts and EDR alerts and MDR, et cetera, and drive the IT and the SOC team loco. Is that what you said?
Yep, exactly. And of course, the CRTP is their kind of introductory red teaming course. And so they don't explain the exact impact. They don't go into as deep as the detail as there is. I mean, defensive security goes miles deep. It's hard to understand exactly what the impact is going to be. But they tell you what alerts you're going to be setting off, what events you're going to be creating, monitoring, and how you can avoid those, which is another useful skill to have. What attacks aren't going to set off alerts? How can you get Mimikatz onto a device without actually getting it onto the device and, freaking out endpoint detection? And so those skills are often a little less spoken of and a little less thought of, but they're extremely, extremely useful.
Absolutely. I totally agree, because it's easy just to get the exe binary and just throw it on and set off everyone, instead of like maybe obfuscating a little bit and just run it into memory instead, and just like do a little cool tactics like that versus just setting on fire and just having everyone scream. So
yep.
that's definitely some good stuff. So the Azure, because I know about the CRTP, I think that's one I'll probably go after like the TCM. And so the Azure one, because I never really did an Azure pen test, to be quite frank. So that's not an area of my expertise. But how was that exam? How was that relatable to like the real, if you're running, a real assessment in Azure?
So that exam was probably my favorite exam that I've taken. It was so unique and so different and just felt really new. I've done a whole bunch of different studying and research for on-prem AD, for web apps, just like that network testing. But cloud is a whole new thing. And it's, I would say, criminally underrated. People don't talk about cloud security as much as they should. And it was really interesting to see how many different little areas of abuse there are in intended functionality in Azure. And the exam itself, same as the CRTP, they tell you during the studying what you can do and what is going to seem weird, what kind of alerts you're going to be setting off if you're doing something really out there. And it kind of branches out outside of just the cloud security, how you're going to get this initial access, which is a lot different than a lot of kind of red teaming certifications, where they typically assume, okay, you're on the network, you have a low privilege user on this machine, try to get across it and get to the DC. This says, okay, well, here is an application. This is hosted on Azure. How are you going to get into the application, and then how are you going to move through their cloud network? So it's really cool. It covers a lot of different areas, and it's very unique. It's not like any other type of testing I've done. So I think it was really enjoyable.
That's sweet. That's awesome. That's super interesting because, like we do talk about like cloud security, but not so much in depth. Like there is like Black Hill Secure, like with Bo, that does like a lot of Azure and AWS hacking, that he's like phenomenal at that. So I think that's definitely a skill set, because there's a million things, right? Like you hear this and this sounds sexy on this call, right? And on this stream, but then tomorrow you're talking about someone that's excuse me, like, oh, API hacking is really cool, and I'll be going to API hacking, and Corey Bell talking about this in API Sec University and this, and then the next week, there's something else. So it's like, this is going to go to the question that I ask myself this a lot, and I want to ask, I guess, both of you, like, how do you stay focused on one thing instead of just getting the noise? I have to learn this, that, and the other. I guess, Trevor, you can go first, and I'll pass it over to Christian.
That I use to decide what I want to do, what I like to do, really. I really enjoy doing applications. I don't enjoy the network testing and the red teaming as much, but I really like applications. I really like hardware hacking. And that's why I enjoy the medical device side so much, is that's what I do. I hack applications and I hack into hardware. And so it's a lot harder to do something you don't like. It's a lot harder to do a job that you wake up every day and you just go, oh, I can't believe I have to do this. This sucks. But when I'm starting on a web app, I'm excited. It's fun for me. I really like the process, and that's kind of how I stay focused. And I try to be the best I can be at web app hacking. I constantly monitor anything coming in. Same with hardware. Anytime there's a new technique, a new paper release, a new talk, I watch it, I read it, I listen, and I just try to live and breathe all this stuff and make sure I'm staying as focused as I can. Using cloud as an example, I don't do a whole lot of cloud stuff. I've taken the certifications for it. I've done plenty of research and I understand it well, but it's not something that I focus on. And so if there's a bunch of new changes going on to Azure, I'm not going to be focusing on it as much as if they're releasing a new version of Nginx, for example, which is something I interact with every single day.
Yep. Fair enough. And, Christian, I guess in your day of, now you're running a business and your focus is not doing the testing. That's why we have folks like us doing these things. So, when you were in the game, when you were in the trenches, what kept you going?
I used to do all the hands-on keyboard stuff, so I'm familiar with Mimikatz and all these things. I like challenges and I like to win. So as a pen tester, I feel like if I am unable to break into an environment or achieve the objective, then I've lost. So it's like I'm very competitive and very driven that way. So I think that's what always kept me going and learning new things, because I was super passionate about making sure I did the best I could do for the client. And also that you guys talked a lot about capture the flags, that if I did a capture the flag, I came in first place. So very driven from that perspective. So I've done quite a few and gotten first in a couple, but like second or third in a few, and that was very frustrating.
Yeah, fair enough. So since we're on with you, Christian, like throughout your career, like do you have any like really more in the hacking space, right? Since we're talking before you got into owning your own stuff, when you're in the trenches, like, yes, I was able to do this because it was so hard. And I have two big stories that I couldn't get domain admin if you gave it to me in my hand because it was so locked down. But then I got it a silliest way that I can possibly say, but maybe I'll tell that story after. And so you have like a big accomplishment like that was super, super hard. It was knocking your head in, and it's like, and you accomplished the task, or you were able to get whatever objective that it was.
Yeah, one of the engagements we do a lot with healthcare. This is back in my previous organization. We were able to get access to pretty much everything, and a lot of it comes to creativity. I think as a hacker, you have to be creative and come up with new ways of doing things.
Mhm.
So what we did is we did some open source intelligence, gathered a list of as many employees as we could of this hospital, and we created this file in Excel and labeled it, 2023 layoffs with the name of the hospital, and put it on a thumb drive. But in that document, we had real names in there. We had the date they're going to be announced to be let go. In that document, we had a macro in there that it would enable us to take over the computer. And we had done our research. We knew what anti-malware they used and everything, so we knew how to avoid it. And with those drives, we dropped like 5 of them in the hospital. And somebody picked up one and put it in the computer. And of course, this plays on someone's curiosity.
Mhm.
They opened the file, and in order to run the macro, we supposedly made it like look secret. So you had to click on this button to reveal the list. But when you click on the button, it ran the macro. And people saw the names on there. And what happened is individuals would email that file to other people because we used real names, and we ended up basically compromising most of the computers in the hospital. And the irony is, the CIO of the hospital got kind of like pissed off at us for using a tactic that was too realistic. And I'm like, if you wanted to hire us to use a tactic that has a bunch of misspellings, like the Prince of Nigeria scam or whatever,
Mhm.
that's a waste of our time. You told us what was out of limits, what was off limits, and what was in limits. So we were within the limits. But from a political standpoint, when an organization thinks they're secure and you come in and show them they're not, sometimes there's pushback because
Mhm.
they've been telling the board and everybody else that they're secure. So, as a business owner and as a pen tester, sometimes you have to learn how to deal with these kind of issues as well.
Yeah, that's a fair point, because when you're doing any kind of assessment, when someone's paying you, the IT, sometimes the IT isn't aware because we're testing against their procedures and their processes. But once they know that, oh, we're going to get a pen test or something's going to happen, it's always like a fight, right?
Yeah.
Or like, oh, we just enabled this today just to test something because we needed it really quick. Or, oh, like if you're running, man in the middle 6 attack, and then like, okay, like, we can see the server's accounts with passwords. And it's like, oh, it was just, I put it that yesterday, but meanwhile, you can just go look at a syslog, or an event log that user was created 10 years ago, right? So, you have to deal with that conflict with especially when you're doing debriefs, with the pen, when you find in all these vulnerabilities or exploits, and you're able to compromise a machine or a whole entire network, conveying that to a client, because you're telling them, I'm in your house and I just robbed all your stuff, right? So no one really wants to hear that. So to say that in a nice manner, and then saying, okay, like make sure you buckle up your windows, or like put a deadbolt on your on your front door, maybe get some better sliding glass doors and all that stuff. So that's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. And go to Trevor. So you said prior, like you did some cool engagements that you were able to have some fun times with some clients. If you want to talk about like what was those cool engagements and some cool compromises, obviously speak as much as you want or as little as you want, and go for it.
Sure. So I have one story that's definitely an anomaly. Coming from an external pen test, I really, same as Christian, I really like the challenge of it, but I like the technical challenge of it. It feels a little bit different for me to beat a person compared to beating a computer. And so getting someone with social engineering is a tried and true tactic. It works really, really frequently. We've had great success doing these phishing campaigns. And then, boom, I have a list of 50 passwords to try. It's all done. But I remember one specific engagement where it was an external test, and they had this external facing website with this admin login panel, pretty big website, a fully functional web app. And I'd been poking at it for a few days. I had a couple findings that I was writing up, but I wanted to find more, and I knew there was something more. And I was plugging away at this admin panel, trying to do some password spraying, some password guessing. And I wasn't seeing anything, wasn't getting any hits. And then I tried to just actually exploit the panel with injection attacks. And so I was going through XPath injection, LDAP injection, SQL injection. And I noticed when I was putting in SQL payloads, it was just stalling slightly. It was maybe a quarter of a second compared to other payloads, but it was enough that I thought there was something going on. And so I kept cycling through payloads until I finally got a time-based payload to work and got measurable delay every single time, worked the same. And I kept plugging at it, got a reverse shell to come out, and the reverse shell was domain admin on the DC. And so outside in one go, I got DA, and that's certainly not something you see every day, but that was a pretty fun one.
Nice. And so do you think, like, was it a service account that had DA access, or was this just like the domain admin like account?
Yeah, it was a service account that was global admin, and It was a global admin, a local admin on the machine it was, and that machine just happened to be the DA and so, or the DC. And so I get in, load on whatever I want, and that was definitely a fun call with the client after that one.
Yeah, that's awesome. So we do have a few questions in here. I'll bring this up on the screen. Oh, my hiker to hey, what's up, Alex? So what would be the most dangerous situation when it comes to hacked medical devices in a hospital environment?
It's a pretty interesting question. So the short answer is just, it depends on the device. A really big concern that's often not really addressed as much as it should be is interoperability, which is, if I can compromise this device, what's going to happen to other devices? On an internal network, one of my favorite techniques is hacking into a printer, and then you can often strip out credentials from a printer, get onto other machines. Same thing applies with a medical device. And so if I hack into this device, even if there's no impact to the device, can I try to move from this into a life support machine? And that life support machine isn't protected, and I can just turn it off. Or maybe I hack straight into the life support machine from the get-go, and I can just turn it off like that. There's really a lot that can be done depending on the device, but more often we're not dealing with a device that is life or death. That still happens, but most, just by nature of how things are, most things aren't life or death. And so most devices aren't going to be in the same way. Then our concern is, how can we make it life or death? And so even if we have just a monitoring device, what if we can make it put out a wrong input or a wrong output? What if we can say, oh, this patient is flatlining and they're given incorrect care? Or what if we can, very popular product is now kind of AI enhanced imaging. And so what if we can poison that and say, this patient has cancer when they don't actually? And what if we can say they don't have cancer when they do? So there's a lot that we can do to really impact patient safety with medical devices, but it's pretty wide range of stuff that can happen depending on what we're testing.
Yeah, fair point. Christian, you have any insight on that?
Yeah, one of the devices we tested in the past, it takes a sample of your blood and tells you what bacteria you have, and then what sort of antibiotic you should be taking. And that device was very hackable, so you could change the algorithm in the device. So if you have sepsis, for instance, which means your blood is toxic, we could have changed it to say that you didn't have sepsis, and then that person would die. And the interesting thing about this device, because it tests for bacteria, it was also used outside of healthcare to test things like hamburger. So he was going to test hamburger for E. coli and salmonella. So hamburger comes off the production, a sample is tested before it's sold. So I used to be in the military. We always did like defense scenarios, and I always think, like, if I'm able to hack this device and taint the hamburger stream with E. coli, the hamburger tests negative for E. coli, I can kill a lot of people. And this has happened in the past where Jack in the Box has sold a hamburger that's killed older people and younger people, babies, because it was tainted with something. So I always look at like the worst case scenario. with these sort of devices, and how that could play out if I were a criminal.
Hmm.
What kind of things I could actually do. And it's pretty scary when you look at what could be accomplished if relatively easily if somebody was motivated.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And thank you for that. So we have another question here. What certification did you mention when you talk about everything, please? So he was talking about the CRTP. Uh, what was the other one for the
Yeah, it
Azure?
was the CRTP, the CARTP for Azure, and then the CBBH for web apps.
Gotcha. And that's from Hack the Box. Cool.
Yep.
And Wesley saying, was it a SQL service?
It was just running as administrator, which
Yeah.
it was technically the SQL service, but it was just administrator account, local admin. Whole network was pretty messed up.
Yeah. And I think you have those problems because, there's, I'm going to admit, I'm the first one to admit, right? Like as a sysadmin, many moons ago, we want things to work. If Christian calls in, his NTFS permissions or his SAT permissions, he can't get onto his network drive, normally I've seen this a lot, and I've seen people that work 10 years in IT and they don't understand what's inheritance. When you're doing NTFS permissions, what it's actually doing to the folders below, or just the file, file permission, because it can be confusing to a lot of people, right? So what do? You just say, freak it. I'm just going to go ahead and right click, go to properties, everyone. All right, Chris, you should be good now. All right, Christian's like, yeah, I can get to my file. Thank you so much. I want to close my ticket because Christian got hit, the problem resolved. Now Trevor comes in, he's not supposed to have access to that HR because he's in another department. He shouldn't be seeing stuff, but now he's doing the hacker that he is, snooping around, curious, looking for loot. And now he's like, oh, look, I can do, I can discover everything net share on the network, and HR, let's just double click. Oh shit, I'm in this folder. And now, because the NTFS permissions and the share permissions are allowed to everyone. So given that, like, you just have to be so careful in, like, now everything is going to, Azure and federated. So, everything's federated to Azure now. So there's not a lot of, like, there's OneDrive and there's like this stuff going on in the world, instead of, like, maybe big organizations, if you're working in-house, but, like, maybe people are using Google or other ways to share files and stuff like that. So it's like, okay, you don't really have your traditional, whack, file server whack, home folder. Maybe some people do if they're in a big organizations, like I said, but for the most part, everything is off-site and in the cloud. So speaking on that, like, going back to your Azure crack and hacking cert. So, like, what can, I guess, like, my question is, like, what are some cool things that we can do with that certification? Like, I get that cert. What kind of assessments? Yeah, we can do cloud hacking, but, like, just for an example, like, what is something that we can do with that cert that we can't do with just this regular CRTP?
That's kind of the interesting thing about cloud to me, is cloud hacking is not going to be a universal thing. There's Kubernetes, AWS, I guess Kubernetes, Google Cloud, AWS, Azure, and they all are completely different. They have their own techniques and styles. I think it is similar in process, Azure hacking specifically, to just a normal internal red teaming assessment, which makes sense because Active Directory and Azure are both maintained and made by Microsoft.
Mm-hmm.
And so you'll try to compromise an entity, whether that's a user account or a service principal kind of being like an application on it. And in the same way as if you're trying to compromise a machine or a user in internal Active Directory, you're going to be stripping out their credentials using Mimikatz. In Azure, it's a whole lot easier. You just say, give me the password, and it says, okay. And then there you go. You have the password. You see what that password can access and move around from there. So the tooling is definitely less complicated. The techniques are a little bit more difficult. There are more safeguards put in place by nature of lateral movement and kind of access management is a lot more tightly controlled, and it's a lot easier to set that up to be secure compared to, on-prem Active Directory, where, I mean, I have seen some crazy loopholes people do to get something to work. Like you were saying,
Yeah.
it's like all global admin on this user just so that the printers will print, and all sorts of stuff like that. On Azure, it's a lot easier to prevent those situations. And so you'll have to be a little more creative and say, okay, well, what can I access here? What can that access? How can I abuse that? How can I find a key vault? If I can find a key vault, I'm probably in a pretty good spot.
Mm-hmm.
But it definitely teaches a little more outside the box thinking of how you're going to move around.
Yeah, that's awesome, because probably people, and including myself, like it's, if you don't do cloud pen testing and you're doing your traditional, compromise from the external, and even with some cloud, like, you can go to like Exchange or your OA, and you can say, okay, we found this going hunter.io, and now we have this domain name. Or, we can just do an NS lookup, set space type equals, MX, and we say, okay, it's going through, Google, or if it's going through Microsoft, it's going through Proofpoint, Mimecast, etc. Whatever the MX rec is like delivering through, right? And now it gives us a little more, headway of how we're going to attack it, because now we can utilize some of the techniques that we can attack on those technologies, right? So I think so. Have you done any like Azure pen tests, or only on the exam? Have you done like real ones on the outside world?
We'll have pretty minimal stuff where it'll be more, I'd say, an audit. The Azure red teaming is just not really the niche that we carve out. We try to focus on medical devices.
Yep.
But a lot of times they'll have a whatever service that's hosted up in the cloud, and that'll be hosted in Azure or AWS. And we can just go in, take a look at that, and say, oh, well, this service principal has excessive permissions here, and I'm able to demonstrate what the vulnerability is. So from the red teaming perspective, it's just not really something that we try to push for. But from an auditing perspective, it's certainly something that we see from time to time.
Cool. Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. So I guess we have about 10 more minutes. I want to respect you guys' time. So, what is something that you guys are pushing for at the very moment with Blue Goat? Like, what is, we want to get more, devices to hack, right? Medical devices to hack, but like, where's the company going to, like, why should people say, oh, I want to use Blue Goat for my medical device? I like, what differentiates us from, Joe Blow down the block?
Yeah, what differentiates us is Trevor's part of the team. As you can tell, he's pretty smart.
Yeah,
he's good at what he does. He's passionate, and we've been doing this for 10 years. I did it in my first company in 2014. Started doing medical device cybersecurity, and this was before the FDA had some really stringent requirements. So we've got a big track record of doing this, and we do it to the degree that's necessary for the FDA to approve or clear a device so somebody can sell it on the market. And one of the things that's a lot of organizations don't understand with medical device cybersecurity, it's very different than normal penetration testing. So a typical penetration testing company will not have the level of detail and scrutiny required for a medical device, because you have to have your test cases, your test plan. You got to have the right threat model and make sure everything is articulated appropriately, which really forces you to think through the test in a lot more detail than just doing a web app test. And this is what we focus on as well. And we haven't had anybody, any submission by a medical device manufacturer get kicked back from the FDA because something was missing in the cybersecurity part of that submission. If we've helped, the cybersecurity part's always been, checked and gone through.
Cool. And that was going to be my question. So say, for example, I have a pen testing company. Can I just go in and pen test medical devices?
I would say no. In fact, a lot of the medical device manufacturers we work with hired a previous penetration testing company that did not know medical devices, and they missed a lot of stuff and then the submission was kicked back from the FDA. So if
Gotcha.
you're a device manufacturer, you can't sell the device until it's approved by the FDA. So if it's kicked back, it costs you a lot of money.
Exactly.
And then they come to us and say, hey, it looks like you guys understand medical devices, pen testing, and the FDA.
Absolutely.
And understanding those three things is a very unique skill set.
Exactly. And that was my point proven. So we have, is this a question? I didn't even read it. I just saw a question mark at the end. We are tasked with my question is that the best practices to use to create stopping point before the device is damaged needs to be recalibrated, etc. Guess that's a Trevor question.
So I have a pretty relevant story. I was recently doing a pen test on a medical device, and it was a big device running a computer on the inside. Before we touched it, we were about to start, and I said, hang on. Go, and I asked them, do you guys have backups, like backups of backups of backups for this device? And they say, yeah. We have everything backed up. I say, are you sure you have everything backed up? And they say, positive, do whatever you want. We break the machine. Like, we get in and we absolutely tore them apart. We had a whole lot of findings. I think we had about 7 critical findings, but kind of the icing on the cake, this was a completely air-gapped device. And we said, what if we stick a Wi-Fi in it? Sure enough, hooked up to the internet. And so then we were able to, and it had an extremely long time, and it didn't quite know what to do. And so the device just crashed. It would blue screen on boot.
This is a device with just USB ports and just a touchscreen, right? There was nothing else?
Yep. This is only USB ports and touchscreen. And so it was a really small scope, but we were able to get them pretty well on this. When the device boots up, it just is blue screen, and the device is literally screaming. It's just making this horrible whining noise the entire time. And the engineers are coming in, seeing what we're doing. And they're just like, okay, it's fine. We have backups. And they say, oh, actually, we don't have backups of the OS. And so we go, okay, well, that's a little bit of an issue. And it all worked out. They had another device, and they were able to just flash a copy from that device onto this device. But there needs to be a stopping point. And I think the most important thing is just make sure everything is 100% backed up and 100% safe before you're going in for testing. Once, the backup was done, they flashed on the OS from the other device. Everything was totally fine. But yeah, that was not a happy computer for quite some time while we were testing it.
Yeah. So the moral of the story, have a backup.
Yeah.
Make sure you have a backup. Awesome. So any last things that you want to share before we wrap things up? Any other questions from the audience? And I guess my thing is, if how can people, if they want to hire Blue Goat to do their medical device hacking, how can they contact Christian or the gang to get that started?
Yeah, they can go to bluegoatcyber.com, and we have our numbers on there, form submissions on there. They can contact us that way.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. Sounds good. So ever heard R2-D2 scream? I don't know what R2. Oh,
it's from Star Wars.
Yeah. I had this totally.
It's like C-3PO.
Yeah, exactly. Wound testing and limits. Computer. Yep. Thanks for sharing. Yeah. So obviously, thank you so much. I'm not sure if there's anything else you want to share, Trevor. Your journey, any other fun, cool stories? We have a few more minutes, so we can just wrap up and you can get your day started.
Yeah, I think just kind of from cool stories, those are the main ones that I like to talk about. But just with the journey side, I think I definitely had an unconventional approach into cybersecurity, but like Christian was saying, the big thing is just your attitude. And when we're looking at Blue Goat for testers, for people to work on these documents and these submissions with us, it's the number one thing that we're trying to see is the attitude. And are you willing to learn? Are you excited to learn? And are you excited to be a hacker? That's really the most important thing you need to have. But kind of the skills come as long as you work on it, as long as you read, as long as you study, the skills will come. It's just the attitude that's kind of the most important thing.
Absolutely.
And some people show up with the attitude that they already know everything, which is
Yeah.
ironic. They're looking for a job, and in our processes, we have several interviews, and some people will show up and they'll try to drive the interview and just articulate how much they know about everything. And it's like, you're not going to get the job if that's your attitude.
Mm-hmm. Exactly, because there's always going to be a spot that you don't know, and if you articulate, "Oh, I know it all," I have, like you said, like the boatload of certifications, and there's always going to be a spot that you don't know. Like there's some stuff that we just talked about tonight, and I'll be the first one to say it live. Like I'm not sure what you guys were even talking about, right? And is it saying that I cannot learn it? No, but if I've never been exposed to something, learning how to say, I don't know, I haven't been there, but I'm willing to learn, it's so much better than saying, oh, I done it 12 years ago, I just don't remember. You're fibbing, and when those folks are. Like I interviewed someone about 6-7 years ago, no, longer than shit, probably 10 years ago now, as a sysadmin. And I come from that background, right? So like, Active Directory was always my bread and butter. I think I've said this multiple times, and the kid said he had his MCSE, which is Microsoft Certified System Engineer.
Yep.
And when he was studying for his MCITP, which is for like 2008 R2 back then, and he's like, I'm an Active Directory AD or domain controller expert. And I was like, okay, so just a quick scenario, and now this is the wrap up the story. We have DC1 and DC2. I added Christian and Trevor on DC1. But when you go to DC2, they're not in the OU of IT, right? What is the issue? Well, how would you get them over there? You wouldn't add them again because then you have double, right? So, and he's like, oh, I'll reboot the servers. And I'm like, no, you're not.
Domain controllers.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. I'm like, no, and I'm very open to, open-minded. So I'm like, oh no, like that wouldn't be a great idea because then I'll knock off other people. And at that time, this is when people, or at least us, we had our TS server or terminal server, all the cows sitting on this box. So it's like, it was a smaller organization. We just had a secondary DC. Just, God forbid our primary goes down. And I'm like, you have your MCSC, so you should have learned some of the tools like rep admin, space St. All, understand sites and services, understand the different networks and subnets within, you should know what an RODC is, what a GC is, a global catalog, understanding these tools. And he's like, oh, and I never seen those tools. And I'm like, who took your exam, dude? Like, because you had to learn these tools, especially at the MCSE level. MCSE was not an easy, just 7 tests, right? So it wasn't easy back then. And
there's multiple choice tests, though. I had my MCSE back in the day.
Yeah,
and that's why I don't put much faith in people that come to me with a certification if it's multiple choice. You can just go find a brain dump.
Fair enough.
Test,
Yeah, and that was, that's the thing about the paper certs, right? Like you're saying, oh, this dude's a paper cert guy because he probably, went on, whatever Test King or these exam dumps and just cram the exam, just memorize the answers and not really understand the core concept and the moral of the story. And that's where, like, I think, we were talking about, the debrief with penetration testing certifications, which is awesome, but at least like CRTO, CARTO, whatever it is, whatever the Azure one, OSCP, PMPT, PJ, whatever we do, we actually have to do it. Yeah. It's not, I think EJPT, is that multiple choice or is that hands-on from INA? I think, Trevor, you took your EJPT, right?
Oh, yeah, sorry. Yeah, I took the EJPT, and that was just, the V2 had some of the hands-on stuff, but it was what users are on the domain, and you just, run crack map exec, and you go, great, pass the test. So The rest of that part was all the multiple choice, which is, gotcha. Definitely not the best way to learn.
Cool. Gotcha. Yeah. So obviously, like, I think that's super, super critical versus like the multiple choice. That's why, like, even with CYSA Plus and Pen Test Plus, like those, I don't want to dog any certification out there because, there's people that need it. Same thing with Security Plus. Maybe for the DoD, you need this to work for, a government contract. But having those the moral of the story, having those hands-on certifications and just hands-on experience, setting up your own home lab, setting up your own stuff, getting that hands-on is definitely critical for being in the field of cyber. But we are at the top of the hour. I want to thank you, Christian, and thank you, Trevor. And, hopefully everyone got some good insight from tonight. I sure did. And I really appreciate you guys and much love. Take care.
Thanks for having us on.